The night air crackles with tension as the lone warrior tightens his grip on his sword, his breath shallow against the looming silhouette before him, a creature of legend, its eyes burning like molten gold in the darkness. This isn't just a battle of strength, it's a clash against the unknown, against the very fabric of myth itself. We've all heard the tales, the Minotaur's labyrinth, the Hydra's regenerating heads, the Sirens' deadly song. But what if these creatures were more than just monsters to be slain? What if their true power lay not in their terror, but in the secrets they carried? For centuries, Greek mythology has painted these beings as forces of chaos, obstacles for heroes to overcome. But dig deeper and you'll find something extraordinary. These creatures weren't just mindless beasts, they were keepers of ancient wisdom, symbols of nature's untamed power, and even mirrors reflecting humanity's deepest fears and desires. The Chimera wasn't just fire and fury, it was a living allegory of the unpredictable forces that shape our world. The griffin, with its eagle's vision and lion's courage, embodied the union of sky and earth, a guardian of divine knowledge. Even the seemingly monstrous Medusa held a power so profound it could freeze time itself in stone. So why does this matter to us today? Because these creatures never truly vanished. Their influence echoes in our stories, our art, even our modern language. The term Achilles' heel comes from a myth. The phoenix symbolizes rebirth in cultures worldwide, and the very idea of a labyrinth traces back to the Minotaur's maze. These myths weren't just entertainment, they were the ancient world's way of explaining the unexplainable, of wrestling with forces beyond human control. And now, we're about to uncover the hidden layers behind these legendary beings, revealing how their unseen powers shaped history, culture, and even the way we see ourselves. This isn't just a journey into the past, it's a key to understanding the mysteries that still resonate in our world today. The Minotaur wasn't just a monster lurking in the shadows of a maze. It was a living metaphor, a grotesque fusion of man and beast that forced ancient Greeks to confront the raw, untamed parts of themselves. Picture the terror of encountering something that was neither fully human nor entirely animal, a creature born from the unnatural union of a queen and a divine bull. This wasn't just a story about a hero slaying a beast. It was a reflection of humanity's own struggle between reason and instinct, civilization and chaos. But the Minotaur's legend runs even deeper. In Minoan culture, bulls weren't just animals, they were sacred, symbols of strength and fertility, worshipped in rituals that blurred the line between man and deity. The labyrinth itself wasn't just a prison, it was a temple, a twisting, turning path meant to mirror life's unpredictability. And the Minotaur, it wasn't just a monster to be feared, it was a guardian of ancient secrets, a living sacrifice that stood at the center of a ritual older than myth itself. Think about the way the Minotaur demanded tribute, 7 young men and women sent into the labyrinth every 9 years. This wasn't random cruelty. It echoed real Minoan practices, where bull-leaping ceremonies tested courage and faith, where blood spilled in the name of gods who demanded proof of devotion. The Minotaur wasn't just a villain, it was the embodiment of a culture's darkest rites, a reminder that power often comes at a price. And then there's Theseus, the hero who walked into the labyrinth armed with nothing but a sword and a ball of thread. His victory wasn't just about strength, it was about cunning, about unraveling the maze's secrets, about outsmarting the beast rather than overpowering it. In that way, the Minotaur's story isn't just about fear, it's about human ingenuity, about our ability to confront the monstrous parts of our world and just maybe find a way through. So the next time you hear the word Minotaur, don't just think of a monster in a maze. Think of the centuries of history, ritual, and meaning woven into its legend. Think of the way it forced ancient Greeks to stare into the abyss of their own duality, and how, in the end, even the most terrifying creatures can teach us something about ourselves. The Minotaur's labyrinth wasn't just a physical maze, it was a mirror of the mind, a twisting, shadowy realm that echoed the darkest corners of human psychology. Centuries before Freud mapped the unconscious, ancient Greeks were already grappling with the idea that our deepest fears and desires could take monstrous form. Picture the labyrinth's endless corridors, the way they doubled back on themselves, trapping victims in a nightmare with no clear exit. Doesn't that sound eerily familiar? It's the same claustrophobic dread we feel when confronting our own repressed thoughts. The parts of ourselves we bury so deep we forget they exist until they resurface as anxiety, dreams, or even compulsions. Freud himself saw myths like the Minotaurs as blueprints for the human psyche. He interpreted the labyrinth as the unconscious mind, a place where primal instincts, like the Minotaur's rage, lurk beneath the surface of civilized behavior. The hero Theseus venturing into the maze with only a thread to guide him. That's the ego, our rational self, trying to navigate the chaos of buried trauma and instinct. And the Minotaur, it's the ID in its purest form, raw, unchecked desire that threatens to devour us if we lose our way. But the labyrinth's symbolism goes even further. In modern therapy, the idea of walking the labyrinth has become a powerful tool for self-discovery. Unlike mazes designed to confuse, therapeutic labyrinths have a single, winding path to the center, a metaphor for the journey inward. Patients walk them to process grief, trauma, or existential questions, retracing their steps just as Theseus did. The act of moving through the twists and turns becomes a meditation, forcing us to slow down and confront what we usually avoid. Think about how often we describe emotional struggles as feeling lost or searching for a way out. The Minotaur's maze gave physical form to those universal human experiences. Even Carl Jung picked up this thread, seeing the labyrinth as a symbol of individuation, the process of integrating our shadow selves, the monstrous parts we deny, into a whole, healthy psyche. The Minotaur wasn't just an enemy to slay, it was a part of Theseus, just as our darkest impulses are part of us. So why does this ancient myth still resonate? Because the labyrinth isn't just stone and shadow, it's a map of the human condition. Every twist represents a choice, every dead end a lesson, and the Minotaur. It's the truth we're afraid to face, that we're all a little bit beast, a little bit hero, and the real challenge isn't escaping the maze but learning to walk through it without fear. Few figures in Greek mythology carry as much misunderstood power as Medusa, the snake-haired Gorgon whose very gaze could turn men to stone. But this wasn't just a monster story. It was a warning, a twisted reflection of how ancient societies feared the very idea of female rage. Before she became a creature of nightmares, Medusa was a devoted priestess of Athena, a woman of striking beauty serving the goddess of wisdom. So how did she transform into the ultimate symbol of terror? The answer lies in betrayal and punishment, not by mortal hands but by divine decree. According to the most haunting version of her myth, Medusa was violated by Poseidon in Athena's own temple. And instead of punishing the god, Athena turned her wrath on the victim, twisting Medusa's beauty into something monstrous. Those serpent locks, they weren't just for fright, they symbolized the way society recoiled from women who dared to express pain or anger. The petrifying gaze. Think about how often women's voices have been silenced throughout history, their words treated as dangerous, their emotions weaponized against them. Medusa's curse wasn't just about turning men to stone, it was about what happens when a woman's suffering is made unignorable. But here's where the myth takes an even darker turn. Medusa's head, once severed by Perseus, became a weapon wielded by the very powers that feared her. Athena placed it on her shield, using the Gorgons' petrifying stare as a tool of protection. Even in death, Medusa's power was co-opted, her rage repurposed to serve the system that destroyed her. Doesn't that sound familiar? How many times have society's most vilified women been stripped of their agency, their stories rewritten to fit someone else's narrative? Yet there's another layer here, one that reclaims Medusa's legacy. In modern feminist retellings, she's not a monster but a survivor, her stone-turning gaze a defense mechanism against those who would harm her. The snakes in her hair, they're not just symbols of terror, they're ancient emblems of transformation and healing, as seen in the rod of Asclepius, the god of medicine. Even her petrification takes on new meaning. What if turning men to stone wasn't about violence, but about forcing them to finally see the consequences of their actions? From ancient pottery to modern protests, Medusa's image has evolved into a rallying cry. She's been embraced as a protector of survivors, her face appearing on everything from courtroom pendants to protest signs. The very same gaze that once symbolized fear now represents resistance, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying thing a woman can do is refuse to stay silent. So the next time you hear Medusa's name, don't just think of a monster. Think of the priestess, the survivor, the woman whose story was distorted but whose power could never truly be erased. While Medusa's story often steals the spotlight, her immortal sisters Esthino and Uriel lurked in the shadows, far more terrifying because death could never claim them. Imagine facing creatures just as monstrous but with an eternity to hone their rage. Unlike Medusa, who was born mortal and fell to Perseus' blade, Esthino and Uriel were divine from the start, their power woven into the fabric of the cosmos. Their immortality wasn't just a trait, it was a weapon sharpened by centuries of grief over their sister's fate. The myths describe Esthino as the most ferocious of the three, her roar alone enough to shatter stone. Uriel, whose name means far-roaming, was said to chase her prey across continents, her voice carrying curses that could curdle blood. Together, they became symbols of unending vengeance, their wrath so potent it echoed long after Medusa's death. When Perseus fled with Medusa's head, their screams tore through the underworld, a sound so harrowing it was said to birth new monsters. But here's what makes their bond so fascinating. Unlike other mythical siblings who often turned on each other, the Gorgon sisters stood united. Their loyalty wasn't just familial, it was primal, a force as unstoppable as their petrifying gaze. In a world where gods and heroes betrayed one another routinely, their solidarity was itself a kind of rebellion. They mirrored the Furies, those ancient avengers of blood crimes, but with a twist. Their justice wasn't impersonal, it was deeply, devastatingly personal. This theme of unbreakable sisterhood ripples through folklore worldwide. The Norse Valkyries rode together, choosing the slain as one. Slavic folklore speaks of the Zoria, three sister goddesses who guarded the cosmos against chaos. Even the Moirai, the Greek fates, spun, measured, and cut the thread of life in eerie unison. There's power in this collective terror, a reminder that while one monster might be defeated, an eternal sisterhood. That's a force no hero can truly extinguish. Yet Esthino and Uriel's immortality carries a tragic irony. While Medusa's mortality made her story one of violence and victimhood, her sister's endless existence condemned them to an eternity of mourning. They couldn't follow her in death, they could only scream her name across the ages, their grief fossilizing into something as unyielding as the statues she left behind. In that way, their curse was twofold: to live forever and to remember everything. So the next time you think of Medusa, remember the sisters who lingered in her shadow, creatures not just of myth but of eternal love and loss. Their story isn't just about terror, it's about the bonds that outlast even death, and the price of loving something the gods have marked for destruction. The Chimera wasn't just a monster, it was a walking, fire-breathing apocalypse, a nightmare stitched together from nature's most destructive forces. Picture this creature emerging from the smoldering hills of Lycia, the muscular body of a lion, the sinewy neck of a goat rising from its back, and a serpent coiled where its tail should be. Every part of its form whispered of catastrophe. The lion's roar echoed earthquakes, the goat's cloven hooves tore into the earth like landslides, and the serpent's hiss carried the venom of flash floods. But the true horror wasn't just its appearance, it was the molten fury it spat from its jaws, turning fields to ash and skies to smoke. To the ancient Lycians living beneath the shadow of active volcanoes, the Chimera wasn't fantasy, it was reality distilled into myth. The region now known as Yanatash still burns today, with natural gas vents igniting eternal flames across the rocky slopes. Imagine witnessing those flickering fires at night, hearing the earth hiss like the Chimera's serpent tail, watching plumes of smoke twist into shapes that looked suspiciously like a lion's mane. It's no wonder they believed a monster lurked there. The Chimera's fire-breathing wasn't just a weapon, it was the embodiment of volcanic eruptions that could bury cities without warning, a primal force that reduced human order to cinders. But the genius of this myth lies in its layers. The Chimera didn't represent just one disaster, it fused three. The lion's domain was the earth, shaking and unstable. The goat clung to cliffs and mountains where rockslides threatened shepherds and villages. The serpent slithered through rivers and marshes, symbols of deluges that swallowed the land. Together, they formed a perfect storm of terror, a reminder that nature wasn't just dangerous, it was unpredictably, creatively violent. Even the way heroes defeated the Chimera holds meaning. Bellerophon didn't confront it head-on, he rode the winged Pegasus, attacking from the one place the earth-bound monster couldn't reach, the sky. That detail matters. For all its elemental power, the Chimera was still trapped by the very forces it embodied, while humanity's ingenuity could take to the air. The myth wasn't just about fear, it was about hope, about outthinking the disasters that seemed unstoppable. Today, we might see the Chimera as a metaphor for climate change, a multi-headed crisis where wildfires, hurricanes, and earthquakes increasingly overlap. The ancients personified nature's wrath as a monster because it helped them grapple with forces beyond their control. We use satellites and science, but the dread remains the same. When the ground trembles or the sky turns orange with fire, part of us still sees the Chimera's shadow in the smoke. The Chimera's fiery image didn't vanish with the fall of ancient Lycia. It slithered into the medieval world, emblazoned on shields and banners as a heraldic nightmare. Knights who chose this creature for their coats of arms weren't just boasting about strength, they were broadcasting something far more primal. In an era where symbols spoke louder than words, the Chimera whispered of unconquerable might, a warning that the bearer could harness chaos itself. Picture a tournament field where one knight's flag ripples with the beast's three-headed silhouette lion, goat, and serpent fused into one grotesque emblem. Opponents wouldn't just see a monster, they'd recognize the unspoken challenge, try to defeat someone who embodies the unstoppable forces of nature. This wasn't random intimidation. Medieval heralds understood the Chimera's layered symbolism better than we might expect. The lion represented sovereign power, the goat resilience in harsh terrain, and the serpent strategic cunning, qualities any ruler or warrior craved. But fused together, they became something transcendent, a visual shorthand for overcoming impossible odds. The Visconti family of Milan famously adopted a winged chimera, its flames rendered in gold thread, declaring their lineage could withstand any siege, any rebellion, any twist of fate. Even the Vatican took note, with Pope Leo X using the chimera in his personal emblem, subtly aligning papal authority with the creature's indomitable spirit. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the chimera sheds its medieval armor for a sleek new identity corporate mascot. Aerospace giants like Lockheed Martin repurposed its image, trading fire-breathing terror for cutting-edge innovation. Their logos feature streamlined chimeras, wings outstretched not over battlefields but blueprints, symbolizing the fusion of groundbreaking technologies. Where knights saw unconquerable strength, engineers see boundless ingenuity. The lion's raw power merged with the goat's adaptability and the serpent's precision. Even video games and fantasy franchises keep the chimera relevant. From Final Fantasy's multi-elemental bosses to Dungeons & Dragons' bestiaries, it evolves while retaining its core truth. Some forces can't be neatly categorized or easily defeated. The Chimera endures because it speaks to humanity's deepest fascination. The thrill of confronting something that defies all logic, yet somehow, against all odds, finding a way to soar above it. The Sirens' song wasn't just a deadly melody, it was the ancient world's most haunting metaphor for the things we crave but can't afford to indulge. Picture Odysseus lashed to his ship's mast, muscles straining against the ropes as those otherworldly voices wrap around him, promising knowledge no mortal was meant to possess. His crew, ears stuffed with wax, row blindly past the island, their faces tense with the effort of ignoring what they can't hear. This wasn't just a scene of survival, it was a primal lesson about the cost of temptation. But here's what most retellings miss. The Sirens didn't lure sailors with random beauty. Their song was custom-made, a whispered playlist of each man's deepest, most secret longings. For some, it might have been the voice of a lost lover. For others, the victory chant of a battle they'd never fought. That's why wax alone couldn't save Odysseus. He needed physical restraint, something to anchor him when the song found the cracks in his resolve. It's the same reason we still talk about siren calls today, whether it's endlessly scrolling through social media, chasing destructive relationships, or losing hours to binge-watched shows. The danger isn't the thing itself, it's how perfectly it mirrors what we already desire. Now compare Odysseus' wax to modern noise-canceling headphones. The principle is eerily similar. Both technologies mute the world's distractions so we can focus on survival, whether that's rowing past mythical creatures or meeting a work deadline. But there's a key difference. Where Odysseus' crew physically blocked sound, noise-canceling tech uses algorithms to create inverse sound waves, essentially fighting fire with fire. It's a modern twist on an ancient problem. How do we filter out the noise that threatens to shipwreck us? Yet the myth takes this further. The Sirens weren't just singing to drown sailors, they were artists. Their island was littered with the bones of men who'd sacrificed everything for one perfect verse. That detail transforms them from monsters into something more unsettling, the dark side of creativity itself. Think of how artists today describe their work as an all-consuming force, how writers chase the perfect sentence through sleepless nights, or how musicians lose themselves in melodies. The Sirens embody that terrifying truth that beauty and obsession often share the same breath. Odysseus survives not by resisting the song entirely, but by hearing it while bound. There's wisdom in that paradox. It suggests we can't and shouldn't eliminate temptation completely. Instead, we need our own versions of ropes and masts, boundaries that let us engage with the world's seductions without being consumed by them. After all, the Sirens didn't vanish when Odysseus sailed away. They're still singing. We've just learned to navigate their island. Long before Homer's Odyssey painted them as deadly temptresses, the Sirens were worshipped as oceanic deities, divine beings who held the fates of sailors in their webbed hands. Archaeologists trace their roots to pre-Greek sea cults, where they weren't monsters at all, but benevolent goddesses with the power to calm storms or summon winds with a whisper. Imagine standing on a Bronze Age shore, offering shells and salt to figures carved with bird-like wings and fish-tailed bodies, praying for safe passage. These early Sirens were closer to mermaids than murderers, their songs less about deception than guidance, a celestial GPS for sailors navigating by stars and superstition. So how did protectors become predators? The shift mirrors history's oldest pattern, fear rewriting the divine. As Greek culture absorbed these older traditions, the Sirens' connection to the sea's unpredictability took on a darker tone. The same voices that once promised safe harbor now embodied the ocean's cruel whims, sudden squalls, hidden reefs, the eerie silence before a wave capsized a ship. Their bird-like features, likely borrowed from ancient storm deities, became symbols of scavengers circling doomed vessels. Even their island location wasn't random. It echoed real maritime hazards like the Strait of Messina, where tides could drag ships onto razor-sharp rocks without warning. But the most telling transformation was their gender. Early depictions show sirens as both male and female, but by the classical era, they'd become exclusively feminine, a shift that reveals how ancient societies projected their anxieties onto women's voices. Just as Medusa's gaze turned men to stone, the siren's song became a metaphor for the danger of female persuasion, the fear that a woman's words could steer men off course. Their hybrid forms, part bird, part woman, weren't just decorative. They visualized this tension between allure and peril, the way desire and destruction could flutter on the same wings. Yet fragments of their original divinity linger in unexpected places. Roman mosaics show sirens holding lyres, their music accompanying souls to the afterlife, a far cry from Homer's bone-strewn island. Some scholars argue this duality was intentional. The same forces that could drown a sailor might also carry him gently to eternity. Even the word siren survives in our ambulances, wails a modern echo of that ancient belief in voices that both warn and mesmerize. The next time you hear waves crash against rocks, listen closely. That sound isn't just water against stone, it's the remnant of a 3,000-year-old conversation between humanity and the deep, a reminder that every monster was once a god and every warning was once a prayer. Cerberus wasn't just a three-headed hound, he was time itself made flesh, each muzzle snapping at a different moment. The left head snarled at the past, teeth stained with memories no soul could reclaim. The center head barked in the present, a constant reminder of mortality's grip. The right head howled into the future, its voice echoing the inevitability waiting for all. Together, they formed a living trinity, ensuring no one escaped the cycle they guarded. But this wasn't just Greek symbolism. It mirrored ancient Egyptian beliefs where Anubis weighed hearts against Mat's feather, or Norse myths where Garma howled at Ragnarök. Every culture that dreamed of an afterlife conjured a guardian for its gates, and Cerberus was Greece's answer to humanity's oldest fear: what if death wasn't final? His role went deeper than guard duty. Those three heads weren't random, they reflected the phases of the moon, the seasons of harvest, even the triple goddess, maiden, mother, crone. In Orphic traditions, initiates whispered that Cerberus' heads represented birth, life, and death, his slobbering jaws the womb, the world, and the tomb. When Heracles dragged him into sunlight for his 12th labor, it wasn't just a show of strength. It was a cosmic disruption, pulling the afterlife's shadow into the realm of the living. No wonder the sight drove entire villages mad. But here's the twist: Cerberus wasn't inherently cruel. He obeyed Hades' orders with the precision of a celestial clock. His job wasn't to punish souls, just to keep them where they belonged. That distinction matters. In Etruscan tomb art, he's depicted with snakes coiled around his neck like healing caduceae, suggesting protection rather than menace. Even Dante borrowed this duality in Inferno, where Cerberus torments gluttons but remains at heart a bound servant of divine law. Modern archaeology reveals how widespread this idea was. From Mesopotamian lion dragons guarding temple thresholds to Aztec Cihuateteo spirits warding the crossroads between life and death, underworld sentinels share eerie similarities. They're never mindless beasts, they're boundary keepers, living metaphors for the line we all fear to cross. Cerberus' most terrifying power wasn't his teeth, it was his inevitability. Because while heroes could outsmart sirens or slay hydras, no one outruns the hound who waits where all paths end. Cerberus wasn't the only monstrous hound in Greek mythology. His lesser-known brother Orthrus lurked in the shadows, a two-headed harbinger of ruin. While Cerberus guarded the underworld's gates, Orthrus stood watch over the crimson cattle of Geron, a three-bodied giant whose very existence defied nature's laws. Picture the scene: a sun-scorched island where the grass grew red from the beast's breath, where twin sets of teeth glistened under a relentless sky. Orthrus wasn't just a guard dog, he was an omen, his dual head symbolizing the duality of destruction, both swift and deliberate, silent and savage. But the family of indestructible beasts didn't end there. Enter the Nemean lion, its golden hide impervious to mortal weapons, its claws sharper than any blade. This wasn't just a predator, it was a force of divine retribution, sent by Hera herself to punish humanity. The lion's invulnerability carried a chilling message. Some threats couldn't be fought conventionally. You couldn't stab what wouldn't bleed, couldn't strangle what never tired. Its very presence turned the forests of Nemea into a graveyard where armor crumpled like parchment and swords shattered on contact. What ties these creatures together, beyond their shared ferocity, is their role in Hercules' labors. Each slaying wasn't just a feat of strength, it was a cosmological reset, a way for the gods to rebalance a world teetering on chaos. When Hercules strangled the Nemean lion, he didn't just remove a monster, he stripped Hera of her vengeance, proving that even divine wrath had limits. The lion's pelt became his armor, a symbol of turning oppression into power. Orthrus' death, meanwhile, cracked open the door to Geron's downfall. Hercules didn't just kill the two-headed hound, he shattered the illusion of invincibility surrounding Geron's twisted realm. The cattle he stole weren't mere livestock, they represented the spoils of a broken system, proof that even the most guarded treasures could be reclaimed. These labors weren't arbitrary, they followed a pattern. Hercules didn't conquer these beasts through brute force alone, he outthought them, turning their own natures against them. The Nemean lion couldn't be pierced by weapons, so Hercules used his hands. Orthrus could see danger coming from both directions, but couldn't anticipate the hero's cunning. Every victory was a lesson, not just in heroism, but in the fragile balance between order and chaos. The deeper truth, these creatures weren't just obstacles. They were cosmic checks placed by the gods to test humanity's resilience. When Hercules skinned the Nemean lion or silenced Orthrus' twin howls, he wasn't just cleaning out the world's monstrous closet, he was rewriting the rules of what mortals could achieve. And in doing so, he proved that even the most indestructible forces could be mastered not by meeting them head-on, but by understanding the shadows they cast. The Hydra didn't just grow new heads, it weaponized regeneration, turning every wound into a fresh nightmare. Imagine Hercules standing knee-deep in swamp water, club raised, only to watch two serpentine necks erupt from each severed stump, their fangs dripping with venom that could kill with a single scratch. This wasn't just a monster, it was nature's unholy answer to the concept of attrition warfare. Cut one head and two more would rise, a living metaphor for any army that seems to multiply despite relentless blows. Centuries later, military strategists would coin a term for this very phenomenon: guerrilla warfare. Like the Hydra's heads, insurgent forces could appear to vanish after an attack, only to resurge elsewhere with renewed strength. The Viet Cong mastered this during the Vietnam War, their tunnel networks mirroring the Hydra's swampy lair. Strike one cell, and another would emerge from the jungle's embrace. Even in modern counterterrorism, the principle holds: dismantle a single faction, and splinter groups often rise like the Hydra's regenerated heads, each more decentralized and harder to predict than the last. But Hercules' solution, searing each neck stump with fire, wasn't just brute force. It was one of history's earliest recorded instances of cauterization, a medical technique still used today to stop bleeding and prevent infection. The myth presaged a scientific truth: some threats require more than cutting away the visible problem. You have to seal the wound at its source. Modern surgeons echo this when they use thermal tools to close incisions, just as diplomats now understand that lasting peace requires more than defeating an enemy, it demands dismantling the conditions that allow them to regrow. The Hydra's legacy even slithers into cybersecurity. Hackers employ Hydra malware, programs that replicate when disrupted, splitting into new iterations to evade detection. Each attempt to delete them risks spawning deadlier variants, a digital echo of Hercules' struggle. What makes the myth endure isn't just the monster's terror, but the unsettling truth it reveals. Some problems escalate when attacked head-on. Whether on battlefields, in operating rooms, or across servers, the Hydra teaches us that victory often lies not in facing the beast as it appears, but in understanding the roots of its resilience. The Hydra's venom wasn't just a deadly afterthought, it was the ancient world's most potent biochemical weapon, a substance so corrosive it could eat through flesh, metal, even fate itself. When Hercules dipped his arrows in the beast's toxic blood, he wasn't just arming himself, he was unlocking a power the gods had never intended mortals to wield. Picture the scene, the hero carefully coating each arrowhead in the Hydra's blackened ichor, the liquid hissing as it fused with bronze, transforming ordinary weapons into instruments of irreversible doom. This wasn't just a tactical upgrade, it was the birth of a terrifying new era in warfare, where a single scratch could doom even the mightiest opponents. Hercules soon discovered the venom's horrifying potential. His first victim, the noble centaur Chiron, a being of wisdom and healing who'd raised heroes like Jason and Achilles. When one of those poisoned arrows accidentally grazed Chiron's leg during a skirmish, the result was agony beyond even his immortal resilience. The venom didn't just kill, it corrupted, unraveling the body while leaving the mind horrifically aware. Chiron, trapped in eternal torment, begged Zeus to revoke his immortality just to escape the pain. That paradox, a healer dying by the very poison he couldn't cure, reveals the venom's true cruelty. It didn't discriminate between friend or foe, hero or monster. Once unleashed, it became a force of pure chaos. The Greeks understood the moral weight of this innovation. Hercules' arrows became infamous, their use carrying a stigma akin to modern chemical weapons. When he later faced the giant Gorgon, the venom tipped the scales unfairly, turning heroic combat into something closer to assassination. Even the gods took notice. Apollo, patron of archery, distanced himself from these tainted weapons, while Hades reportedly tightened security in the underworld, fearing poisoned souls might destabilize the natural order. But the most chilling legacy lies in how the venom blurred the line between mortal and divine punishment. Before this, only gods could inflict lingering, incurable suffering. Now humanity had stolen that power, packaging it into something as simple as an arrowhead. It's no coincidence that the last monsters Hercules faced, like the Stymphalian birds or the Cretan bull, were defeated without venom. The lesson had sunk in. Some weapons change not just battles, but the very nature of heroism. Centuries later, archaeologists would uncover arrowheads in Mycenaean ruins, their tips still stained with traces of toxic compounds. Whether from hemlock, viper venom, or something far older, the evidence suggests Hercules' myth had roots in reality. Ancient warriors did indeed experiment with poisoned projectiles. The Hydra's venom, then, wasn't just a fantastical detail. It was myth's way of grappling with a sobering truth. Once knowledge is weaponized, there's no returning to innocence. Pegasus wasn't just a winged horse, he was a living force of nature, his hooves striking the earth with the same thunder as the storms he rode. Most legends fixate on his wings, those vast cloud-white sails that carried heroes across battlefields. But his true power lay beneath him, in the way his every step could split rock and summon springs from barren stone. Take the Hippocrene, the legendary fountain his hoof cracked open on Mount Helicon. Its waters didn't just quench thirst, they ignited creativity, inspiring poets like Hesiod to call it the horse's spring, a divine gift from the muses themselves. That's the untold secret of Pegasus. His flight wasn't just physical. It was a bridge between earth and sky, his hooves channeling the same raw energy that shaped mountains and storms. When Pegasus galloped across the heavens, he didn't just move through clouds, he commanded them. Ancient farmers whispered that his wings stirred the winds, his mane flicking rain from the air like a celestial crop duster. Sailors watched distant thunderheads roll in and swore they saw his silhouette in the flicker of lightning, a shadow with the arc of wings and the ripple of muscle. This wasn't mere myth-making, it was climate science before the concept existed. The Greeks understood that weather followed patterns, that certain forces like a massive winged horse could disrupt or direct them. Pegasus became the symbol of that untamed power, his very presence explaining why some storms arrived with fury and others with life-giving rain. But the most haunting detail: his connection to Zeus. After helping Bellerophon slay the Chimera, Pegasus ascended to Olympus, where the god of thunder harnessed him as a living weather vane. When Zeus needed lightning delivered, Pegasus rode the updrafts, his wings conducting static like feathered conductors. Some fragments of Orphic hymns even describe him as the hoofed cloud gatherer, a nod to his role in summoning tempests. It's no accident that later cultures depicted unicorns with similar powers. Pegasus set the template, proving that equine magic wasn't just about speed or beauty, but about shaping the world itself. Today, we see his legacy in the way storms still carry names, the way poets chase inspiration like a fleeting winged shadow. Every time a spring bubbles unexpectedly from dry ground or a summer cloudburst saves a parched field, there's an echo of that primordial hoofall. Pegasus wasn't just a creature of myth. He was the ancient world's way of explaining the unexplainable, the moment when earth and sky collide and something extraordinary is born. Pegasus' origin defies the usual laws of nature. He sprang from death itself, bursting forth fully formed from Medusa's severed neck as her blood mingled with the sea's foam. But this wasn't random chaos, it was a cosmic balancing act. His father, Poseidon, had once been Medusa's lover before her transformation, weaving divinity into the Gorgons' tragedy. So when Perseus struck her head from her body, the sea god's influence surged through her veins, transforming spilled blood into something transcendent. The result, a creature as radiant as his mother had been feared, wings shimmering like sunlight on waves. This paradox, beauty born from violence, purity rising from corruption, made Pegasus an anomaly among mythical offspring. Compare Pegasus to his sibling, Chrysaor, the golden-armored giant who emerged beside him. Where Pegasus took to the skies, Chrysaor became a warlord, his name meaning golden sword. Together, they embodied the duality of their origins, one a symbol of elevation, the other of conquest. Even among Poseidon's other progeny, like the Cyclops Polyphemus or the shape-shifting Proteus, Pegasus stood apart. Most of the sea god's children reflected the ocean's untamed fury, but Pegasus carried its boundless freedom instead. The Greeks saw profound meaning in this contrast. While monsters like the Chimera or Cerberus represented nature's unchecked savagery, Pegasus became a bridge between realms. His wings carried him to Olympus, yet his hooves remained rooted in earthly magic, able to crack open springs with a single step. Even his partnership with Bellerophon, a hero later struck down for hubris, highlighted this tension. Pegasus could uplift mortals but never fully belonged to their world. Later poets would spin this duality into metaphor. Hesiod called him the storm-footed one, linking his flight to sudden summer rains that brought both destruction and renewal. Artists painted him with wings the color of seafoam, a nod to his birth from Poseidon's domain. And in temple carvings, he often appears beside Athena, the goddess of wisdom, holding his bridle, a subtle hint that even divine chaos could be guided toward higher purpose. Pegasus' legacy endures because he defies simple categorization. He wasn't just a tool for heroes or a pretty symbol of inspiration. He was proof that even the darkest myths could take flight, that from the blood of monsters, poetry could rise. The Cyclopes weren't just one-eyed brutes of legend. They were the ancient world's most ingenious engineers, crafting weapons so potent they shaped the fate of gods. Deep beneath Mount Etna's smoldering slopes, their forges glowed with a heat that could melt stone, pounding celestial bronze into the lightning bolts Zeus would wield like divine artillery. These weren't just symbolic tools, they were precision instruments, each jagged streak of lightning tempered to exact specifications, humming with barely contained chaos. The Cyclopes understood something even Olympus had forgotten. True power wasn't just about strength, it was about controlling the forces no one else could harness. Their workshops defied mortal logic. Imagine caverns where lava flows acted as natural smelters, where the very air shimmered with geothermal energy. Anvils the size of temples rang with the strikes of hammers that never missed, each blow echoing through the underworld like tectonic shifts. When Hephaestus needed automatons, self-moving statues with veins of liquid gold, or guardian constructs with eyes of smelted garnet, he didn't work alone. The Cyclopes were his collaborators, their knowledge of elemental forces merging with his divine craftsmanship. Together, they built Tolos, the bronze giant who patrolled Crete's shores, his body a labyrinth of gears and molten ichor. They forged Pandora's box not as a simple container, but as a locking mechanism so intricate it required celestial keys. But the most staggering revelation lies in how their creations mirrored natural phenomena. Zeus' lightning bolts didn't just resemble storms, they channeled them. Homer describes how the god would heft a bolt like a javelin, its surface crackling with the same energy as a thunderhead moments before it splits the sky. Later poets claimed each bolt was inscribed with Thracian runes, glyphs that directed its path with terrifying accuracy. This wasn't magic, it was divine technology, a precursor to concepts we'd now call targeted energy weapons. Modern archaeology hints at the roots of these myths. Excavations near ancient Thera uncovered workshops with advanced metallurgical tools, their designs so precise they seem otherworldly. Etna's volcanic glass deposits contain traces of metals found nowhere else in the Mediterranean, proof that the region's real-life smiths worked with materials that must have seemed supernatural to outsiders. Even the Cyclops' single eye takes on new meaning when you consider the precision required for such craftsmanship. In a smoke-filled forge, depth perception matters less than absolute focus, that unblinking concentration on the task at hand. What makes their legacy endure isn't just their brute strength, but their role as the unseen architects of divine order. Without their lightning, Zeus couldn't enforce his will. Without their automata, Hephaestus' genius would lack physical form. They remind us that behind every god's glory stands the labor of those who shape the tools of power, and that sometimes the true masters of destiny are the ones who stay in the shadows, their hammers ringing like distant thunder. Polyphemus the Cyclops didn't just roar in pain when Odysseus drove that burning stake into his eye. He saw the future. As the hero and his men clung to the underbellies of sheep, sneaking past the blinded giant, Polyphemus unleashed a prophecy that would haunt Odysseus for decades. If you've truly escaped, know this, your journey home will be cursed. Poseidon, my father, will see to it. You'll lose every companion, you'll crawl ashore alone on a foreign ship, and when you finally reach Ithaca, chaos will be waiting. This wasn't just empty rage, it was a vision so precise it rivaled the oracle of Delphi. What makes this moment unforgettable is how it flips the script on prophecy itself. Usually, oracles are blind seers like Tyges, their physical blindness a trade-off for divine sight. But Polyphemus, he gained his foresight after losing his eye, as if the act of blinding ripped away the veil between present and future. The irony cuts deep. Odysseus thought he was outsmarting a monster, but in that cave, the monster became the seer. Monster prophecies follow a chilling pattern across myths. The Sphinx's riddles weren't just word games. They forced Oedipus to confront truths about his own identity. The python at Delphi hissed predictions before Apollo slew it, its dying breaths birthing the famous oracle. Even the Furies didn't just punish crimes, they whispered the fates of families for generations. These creatures weren't just obstacles, they were living, breathing warning systems, their curses acting as narrative time bombs waiting to detonate. Polyphemus' curse stands out because it weaponizes storytelling. When he describes Odysseus' future suffering, he's not just predicting events, he's shaping them. Every word coils around the hero's fate like a serpent, ensuring Poseidon's wrath will follow through. Modern psychology would call this a self-fulfilling prophecy. The act of speaking the curse makes it real, embedding it in Odysseus' psyche until he starts fulfilling it himself. After all, it's only after hearing Polyphemus' words that Odysseus begins his decade of disastrous choices, taunting the Cyclops from his ship, opening the bag of winds, slaughtering Helios' cattle. Archaeologists have found evidence that the blind prophet trope dates back to pre-Homeric seers who used hallucinogenic fumes or sensory deprivation to induce visions. The Cyclops' single eye might symbolize this paradox, losing one kind of sight to gain another. Just as Tyreus traded his vision for prophecy, Polyphemus' physical blindness unlocked a godlike perspective, proving that sometimes to see clearly, you first have to lose the world. The harp wasn't just a blade, it was a living extension of divine retribution, its curved edge humming with the weight of cosmic rebellion. Forged from adamant, a metal said to be shavings from the world's first bones, this sickle-shaped weapon became the teeth of revolution itself. When Cronus seized it to overthrow his tyrannical father Uranus, the harp didn't just cut flesh. It severed the old order from the new, spilling divine blood so potent it birthed the Furies from the earth. Picture the scene, the night sky itself recoiling as the blade arced downward, not just castrating a god but symbolizing the brutal, necessary act of cutting away the past to make room for the future. Yet the harp's story didn't end there. Centuries later, it reappeared in Perseus' hands, its edge now polished by time and destiny. Where Cronus used it to divide heaven from earth, Perseus wielded it to separate myth from monster, lopping off Medusa's head with a stroke so precise it preserved her petrifying power in death. The symmetry is chilling. The same weapon that once ended a god's reign now turned a cursed woman into a relic of divine paradox. Medusa's severed head, still hissing with serpents, became both trophy and tool, proof that the harp didn't just destroy, it transformed. What makes this blade unique among mythical artifacts is its sentience. Homer describes it whispering to its wielders, its curve aligning with their intentions like a compass needle to true north. When Cronus held it, the harp resonated with his hunger for power. When Perseus gripped it, the blade hummed with Athena's divine strategy, guiding his hand to strike where mortal strength alone would fail. This wasn't just a weapon following orders, it was an active participant in destiny, choosing its moments as carefully as the fates chose their threads. Archaeologists have found sickle-shaped ritual blades buried in Minoan tombs, their bronze edges still sharp enough to draw blood after 3,000 years. These real-life parallels suggest the harp's myth sprang from something tangible, perhaps ceremonial implements used in rites of kingship, where cutting ties with old rulers was as much spiritual as political. Even the name harp echoes ancient words for to reap and to judge, binding harvest imagery to divine justice. The harp's legacy lingers in our language today. Harvest and harpy share its root, a reminder that cutting away whether crops or corruption is an act as old as time. From Cronus' coup to Perseus' precision, this blade taught a brutal lesson. Sometimes creation requires destruction, and justice wears many faces, some sharper than others. Talos wasn't just a bronze giant, he was the ancient world's first autonomous defense system, a towering automaton forged by Hephaestus to patrol Crete's shores with liquid divinity coursing through his veins. Picture this 7-foot colossus striding along the coastline, his body glowing like embers in twilight, fueled not by electricity or steam but by ichor, the same golden fluid that served as blood for the gods. This wasn't just a statue brought to life, it was divine engineering at its most audacious, a precursor to artificial intelligence millennia before the concept existed. What set Talos apart from other mythical guardians was his heat-based weaponry. Ancient texts describe him heating his metal frame to searing temperatures, then crushing invaders against his chest, branding them with the mark of the gods. Some accounts claim he could hurl boulders with volcanic force, his arms acting like catapults loaded with molten rock. But his most terrifying feature was his ability to sense intruders from miles away, not through sight or sound, but through an innate awareness of mortal presence, as if the ichor in his veins pulsed with celestial radar. Yet for all his might, Tolos had a fatal flaw, a single bronze seal at his ankle, a valve that regulated the ichor flowing through his body. When the sorceress Medea deceived him into removing it, his life force drained away like sand through an hourglass. This detail didn't just inspire the myth of Achilles' heel, it mirrored ancient metallurgy's very real vulnerabilities. Bronze smiths knew even the strongest alloys had weak points where seams or rivets could fail. Tolos' ankle valve was myth's way of acknowledging that no creation, no matter how divine, is without its breaking point. The parallels to modern technology are uncanny. Tolos' ichor functioned like coolant in a supercomputer, regulating his systems to prevent overheating. His autonomous patrols anticipate today's drone sentries, programmed to identify and eliminate threats. Even his downfall mirrors cybersecurity breaches, one exploited vulnerability unraveling an entire network. Philosophers like Aristotle even speculated about Tolos as a thought experiment. Can something without a soul truly think? The answer, it seems, was written in bronze millennia before silicon chips. Crete's fishermen still whisper that on windless nights you can hear the echo of metallic footsteps along deserted beaches, not the ghost of Tolos, but the memory of humanity's oldest dream, to build guardians that never sleep and to wrestle with the consequences of playing God. The molten bronze coursing through Tolos' veins wasn't just a fantastical detail, it echoed the sun's own fire, a celestial kinship that tied him to Crete's oldest solar cults. On this island where the sun god Helios was worshipped long before Apollo's rise, bronze held sacred significance. Minoan artisans crafted mirrors to catch sunlight in temple rituals, polishing the metal until it glowed like a miniature star. Tolos' body, radiating heat as he patrolled the coast, didn't just resemble a weapon. He was a walking altar flame, a manifestation of solar power harnessed for protection. The way his form shimmered at dusk, mirroring the dying light on the Aegean, suggests the ancients saw him as more than a machine. He was a bridge between earthly metals and celestial fire. This solar connection deepens when you examine Daedalus' other inventions. The legendary craftsman, who some myths credit with refining Tolos' design, also built wings fastened with wax and bronze hinges, a nod to Icarus' doomed flight toward the sun. Even his labyrinth, with its spiraling passages, may have doubled as a solar calendar, its corridors aligning with solstice light patterns. If Tolos was Daedalus' creation, it's no stretch to imagine his molten core as a deliberate echo of solar worship, a towering embodiment of the god whose chariot crossed the sky each day. Archaeological finds on Crete hint at the real-world tech that could have inspired Tolos. At the Palace of Knossos, engineers designed advanced ventilation shafts to channel sunlight into underground chambers, creating the illusion of glowing walls. Nearby workshops produced bronze figurines with articulated limbs, their joints movable through an early form of lost wax casting. Most intriguing are the fragments of what historians call Hephaestus wheels, ceramic discs found near forges, their surfaces etched with spiral patterns that some believe functioned as primitive solar concentrators, focusing heat to melt metals. Could these have been prototypes for Tolos' internal mechanics? The overlap between myth and invention grows clearer when you consider Mediterranean solar legends. The Colossus of Rhodes, another bronze giant, was explicitly modeled after Helios. Earlier Hittite texts describe metal men guarding temples, their bodies polished to reflect sunlight as a warning to invaders. Even the biblical Goliath, clad in bronze armor that shone like the sun, fits this pattern. Tolos wasn't an isolated myth, he was part of a Bronze Age fascination with merging divine light and human craftsmanship. What makes Talos extraordinary is how his legend distills an entire era's technological ambition. Those who saw Minoan forges at night, their crucibles bubbling with molten metal, might truly have believed they were glimpsing the birth of a god. When the sun set behind Crete's mountains, casting long shadows that made statues seem to move, it's no wonder stories took root of a giant who came alive at twilight. Talos wasn't just a guardian of shores, he was the embodiment of humanity's oldest dream, to capture a spark of the sun's power and forge it into something that could last forever. The Furies didn't just punish crimes, they weaponized guilt, twisting it into a living nightmare that gnawed at the mind long after the blood had dried. When Orsts murdered his mother Clytemnestra to avenge his father Agamemnon, their retribution wasn't physical, it was psychological. They slithered into his dreams first, their voices hissing reminders of kin blood spilled until waking and sleeping bled together. Then came the waking visions, his mother's face reflected in every pool of water, her screams echoing in tavern laughter, her fingers brushing his shoulder though no one stood behind him. Modern psychologists would recognize this instantly, the hypervigilance, the flashbacks, the way trauma reshapes perception. The ancients called it divine madness, but we'd now name it with clinical precision. Post-traumatic stress disorder, inflicted not by war, but by the relentless gaze of deities who refused to let the past stay buried. Their appearance was no accident. Those bat-like wings weren't just for intimidation, they symbolized the darkness that follows when justice is perverted, the way guilt flutters just out of sight but never out of mind. Their hair, a nest of living vipers, mirrored the toxic thoughts that coil tighter the more one struggles against them. Even their breath had purpose, an odor of rust and rotting lilies that clung to their victims, a sensory trigger ensuring every memory of the crime remained visceral. This wasn't random horror, it was precision-engineered torment. The Furies' influence slithers through centuries of demonology. Medieval artists depicting Satan's wings borrowed their jagged, leathery texture. Renaissance painters gave demons serpentine hair that writhed independent of wind, a direct homage to the Gorgons and Furies who inspired them. Even the concept of Hell's Harpies, creatures who punish moral failings with psychological torture, traces back to these ancient avengers. The Furies didn't just haunt individuals, they shaped humanity's collective nightmare of divine retribution. But here's the twist later myths often overlook: the Furies weren't evil. They were inevitability personified. When Athena finally intervened in Orst's trial, offering purification rather than endless punishment, the Furies didn't vanish, they transformed. The same beings who tormented Orsts became the Humanides, the kindly ones, protectors of justice rather than mere punishers. Their snakes became symbols of wisdom, their wings now sheltering the vulnerable. This metamorphosis holds a profound truth. Even the darkest forces can be redirected if society dares to confront what made them necessary in the first place. The Furies may have been feared as relentless punishers, but their true purpose ran deeper. They weren't just instruments of vengeance, they were the ancient world's most meticulous restorers of cosmic balance. When they hounded Orst for spilling his mother's blood, their goal wasn't merely torment, it was purification. Blood guilt, in Greek belief, wasn't just a personal burden, it polluted the land itself, seeping into rivers and crops like a toxin. The Furies' pursuit acted as a kind of spiritual detox, their relentless pressure forcing the guilty to confront their crimes until the stain of murder was scrubbed clean through ritual or retribution. Imagine them as divine pressure washers, their wrath scalding away moral decay until society could heal. This idea of divine balancing mirrors Eastern concepts like karma, but with a key difference. Where karma operates impersonally, a universal ledger of cause and effect, the Furies were deeply personal, their faces contorted with the grief of the wronged, their voices echoing the victim's unspoken rage. Hindu and Buddhist traditions speak of the karmic cycle as inevitable, like gravity. The Furies, though, were anything but detached. They wept as they punished, their fury laced with sorrow, because their duty wasn't just to uphold order, it was to mend the bonds torn by violence. Take the trial of Orsts as a turning point. When Athena intervened, offering justice through law rather than endless retribution, the Furies didn't vanish, they evolved. The same entities who once screamed for blood became the Humanoids, the kindly ones, guardians of civic harmony. This transformation reveals a truth often lost in myth: the Furies' wrath wasn't mindless. It was a corrective force as precise as a surgeon's knife, excising corruption so healing could begin. Compare this to Japan's Onryo, vengeful spirits who, once appeased, often transform into protectors. Or the Hindu goddess Kali, who destroys only to clear space for renewal. The pattern is universal. Wrath and mercy aren't opposites, but two phases of the same restorative process. The Furies remind us that sometimes balance isn't found in forgiveness alone, but in the scalding truth that precedes it. Their legacy endures in our deepest legal principles, that justice must be more than punishment. It must cleanse, reconcile, and above all, restore what was broken. The phoenix didn't just rise from ashes, it conducted a celestial symphony of destruction and renewal. Its 500-year cycle mirroring the alchemist's quest to turn base metals into gold. Ancient texts describe its final act not as a death but as a ritual, the bird building a nest of cinnamon and myrrh, then igniting itself in a conflagration so pure it left no soot, only a smoldering egg of potential. This wasn't mere resurrection, it was apotheosis the moment flame became flesh again, each rebirth stripping away impurities like a refiner's fire. Alchemists saw their own work in this cycle, their flasks and furnaces echoing the phoenix's pyre, both processes seeking to distill existence down to its essence. But the phoenix's most overlooked power lay in its tears, a substance so potent it could heal mortal wounds and neutralize venom. When the bird wept over an injury, its feathers shimmered with liquid sunlight, each drop carrying the concentrated warmth of its solar lineage. Egyptian priests collected these tears in obsidian vials, using them in rites that merged medicine with magic. The connection wasn't coincidental. The phoenix's association with Ra, the sun god, meant its tears were thought to contain fragments of the sun's own regenerative power. Modern scientists would later discover that cinnamon and myrrh, the very materials in the phoenix's nest, have proven antibacterial properties, hinting at a deeper wisdom behind the myth. The bird's rebirth also followed an astronomical rhythm. 500 years aligned with celestial events, the cycling of comets, the convergence of planetary orbits, suggesting the phoenix wasn't just a creature of Earth but a timekeeper for the cosmos. Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder noted that the phoenix always returned during a solar eclipse, its arrival marking the moment when the moon briefly devoured the sun, only for light to triumph again. This duality, destruction and healing, darkness and light, made the phoenix more than a symbol. It became a living lesson in equilibrium, teaching that renewal isn't possible without surrender. Even its ashes held transformative power. Persian fire temples blended them into sacred incense, believing the smoke could carry prayers directly to the divine. Chinese alchemists used them in elixirs seeking immortality, while Byzantine emperors embedded them in crowns as a reminder that all earthly power is temporary. The phoenix's gift wasn't just its rebirth, it was the humility that came from knowing every end carries the blueprint of a beginning. Today, we see its legacy in the way forests regenerated after wildfires, or how scientists harness stem cells to rebuild what was lost. The phoenix never truly vanished, it just learned new forms, whispering the same truth across millennia. To live is to burn is to cleanse, and from the clearest fire comes the purest rise. Phoenix feathers weren't just mythical adornments, they were ancient medicine's most coveted ingredient, believed to channel the bird's regenerative power into human flesh. Egyptian papyri from the time of Thutmose III describe healers grinding charred feather ash into poultices, mixing it with honey and lotus oil to treat battle wounds. The logic was eerily precise. If the phoenix could rise from its own ashes, perhaps its feathers could spark recovery in mortals. Roman physician Galen later documented a similar practice, prescribing phoenix feather elixirs to wealthy patricians suffering from wasting diseases. His notes reveal a fascinating detail. The rarer the feather was claimed to be, the more potent its healing effect seemed. This wasn't just superstition. It was an early blueprint for the placebo effect, where belief in a treatment's rarity amplified its perceived power. But the real magic lay in how these remedies blurred the line between physical and symbolic healing. When a Theban priest pressed a phoenix feather against a dying man's lips, he wasn't just administering medicine, he was performing a ritual. The feather became a conduit for the sun god Ra's life-giving energy, its golden sheen mirroring the dawn that chased away darkness. Temples along the Nile kept ornamental feathers in crystal reliquaries, not because they were genuine. Most were peacock or ibis feathers dyed crimson, but because the act of venerating them stirred hope in the sick. Modern clinical studies now confirm what the ancients intuited. Patients given placebos with elaborate backstories often show measurable improvement, their bodies responding to the story as much as the substance. The parallels go deeper. Egyptian medical texts prescribed phoenix feather tonics alongside precise incantations, the words themselves considered part of the treatment. A surviving scroll from Memphis details how the potion had to be stirred 7 times while reciting the phoenix's myth, each turn of the spoon symbolizing a year in the bird's rebirth cycle. Compare this to today's mindfulness-based therapies, where the narrative surrounding a treatment, whether it's a pill or a meditation practice, can enhance its effectiveness. The feather wasn't the active ingredient, the ceremony was. Yet there's a tantalizing possibility that some of these remedies held real pharmacological value. Recent excavations near Alexandria uncovered a cache of purported phoenix feathers. Carbon testing revealed they were actually cinnamon bark shavings, a spice long known for its anti-inflammatory properties. When mixed with myrrh, another staple in phoenix nest replicas, they formed a compound still used in modern wound care. The myth may have been a vessel, but the medicine inside was ahead of its time. From the placebo effect to psychosomatic healing, the phoenix's legacy endures every time a doctor's white coat inspires calm or a branded pill works better than its generic counterpart. Those ancient healers understood something we're only now quantifying. Sometimes the most potent remedy isn't just what you take, it's the story you believe in. From the Minotaur's labyrinth reflecting the mind's darkest corridors to the phoenix's tears inspiring ancient medicine, these mythical creatures weren't just stories. They were humanity's first attempts to name the unnameable, to harness the invisible forces shaping our world. The Hydra's regenerative horror became a blueprint for guerrilla warfare. Tolo's molten veins predicted autonomous defense systems, and the Fury's psychological torment mirrored modern trauma studies long before we had the vocabulary to describe them. These legends were more than entertainment. They were the ancient world's laboratories where science, philosophy, and morality collided in spectacular ways. Consider how deeply these myths permeate our modern lexicon. When we speak of Herculean tasks or Pandora's boxes, we're not just borrowing phrases, we're invoking centuries of layered meaning. The Chimera's fire-breathing terror lives on in corporate logos and military tech, while Cerberus' vigilance echoes in cybersecurity protocols guarding our digital underworlds. Even the Sirens' deadly allure resurfaces in algorithm-driven addictions, their songs now personalized playlists of dopamine triggers. These creatures never truly vanished, they shapeshifted, adapting to every era's fears and aspirations. The most fascinating transformation, though, lies in how these myths birthed real-world innovation. Daedalus' wings became a blueprint for aviation, the harp's precision inspired surgical tools, and the Cyclops' forges foreshadowed industrial automation. Mythology didn't just imagine the future, it laid the groundwork for it, turning divine whims into human ingenuity. That's the hidden power these creatures wielded. They were thought experiments disguised as bedtime stories, challenging each generation to ask, what if? So here's a question to leave you with. If ancient myths gave us the Hydra and Pegasus, what creatures might our era birth? Will AI become our modern oracle, cryptic and all-knowing? Could quantum computing be this century's philosopher's stone, turning data into gold? Or perhaps climate change is the true kraken, stirring from the deep to test our collective heroism? The myths aren't finished, they're just waiting for us to write the next chapter. Which modern marvel or menace do you think deserves its own legendary status? Drop your picks in the comments. Who knows, maybe centuries from now, they'll be the myths keeping people up at night.